Hi, I'm CJ and this is my RC channel. In this series of videos, I'm going to be assembling the Serpent SRX8 GT 1/8 scale on-road race car. And I've pretty much just laid out the majority of the tools that I'm going to be using. Variety of Allen wrenches, socket wrenches, some miscellaneous things, some specialty tools such as a shock shaft holder, nice set of T-handle Allen wrenches, and other specialty tools like this shock stand. And that'll come in handy later when I'm building the shocks, filling them with oil, things of that nature. So I'm going to start where the manual begins, which is assembling the front and rear differentials. They're identical. You've got two bags, and I'm basically gonna build them up. They have a different grade of shock grease or diff oil in each one of them. So what I'll be doing is building them up and then marking each bag as either front or rear, drop it into the bag and set it aside for later. That way I don't mix up. Now the difference in the shock oil might be thick enough that it'll be easy enough to tell just by twisting the differential which one is rear and which one is front, but that may not be the case. So just to be safe, I'll put them in bags and set them aside. So now that I am ready to get going, I'm going to just open these bags up, break out parts. I'll discuss anything relevant and try to show you the entire process as I go. I'm not going to repetitively show you both diff builds because they're going to be identical with the exception of which diff grease is put into them. Oh, and in case any of you are curious, this pit mat here is it's actually a yoga mat. You can get them for $3 or $4, $5 or $6 tops. If you go to Walmart, you'll probably spend $3 or $4. It's a nice thin rubber mat, and the texture tends to keep things from rolling off on you, especially things like bearings. I've been using yoga mats as pit mats for years because one mat can be cut usually into several pieces that are big enough for the pit area at most racetracks. And if you are working with a larger space like I am here, you can cut one to fit. So it's a nice way to go. And I like the gray because it helps show parts. If you can get them in black, but there's a lot of black pieces and then they tend to kind of blend in. You find yourself searching for miscellaneous screws and things. Also, it's good to have a few containers around when you start doing these things, so that you can put all the screws in one, gears or bearings in another, things of that nature, and not have stuff rolling around the table. Okay, I've gone over the instructions here a little bit. They're a little light on the instructions themselves, but if you take your time and look things over, things become more obvious. For example, there's this material right here. It's like a type of foam. You need to cut it into 8 pieces, 14.7 to 14.9 millimeters in length, and they are inserted, and this is hard to show you because it's black. Basically there are sets of 3 holes. 2 of them are open, the ones at either side, and then there's a closed one. It becomes obvious when you see it. So the 2 that are open allow fluid to come through, and they're a little larger in diameter. So you're going to cut those pieces and put one on either side of the closed hole, which is for a bolt that is going to cap this off with the large gear. And the large gear is actually the cap. There is no secondary piece of plastic here. This just goes on here with the blue gasket, and that screws that down. Now there is another little tricky thing, and that is this pin right here and they show it going into the hole and then a grub screw coming in from behind. Now, what this is, and I wish they would describe it a little more, because that would definitely help people, is that this is just an access hole. The pin is going to go through the hole in the out drive here, and the out drives are both identical, so it doesn't matter which one you put on which side. And the bearing, in the case of here, just goes over that piece right there sticking out, the metal piece, and the out drive slides through, and then you put on a rubber gasket. That's these small, almost clear rubber gaskets, and then you're gonna follow that with a washer, and then one of the two large diff gears goes in place over that. Now, here's the thing. This slot in the gear is where the pin goes. So let me just show you that outside of the casing. The pin goes through here like this, and then the gear goes on here with the pin inside, and that locks it in place. And once everything is just kind of pressure fit. Once everything is in place, there's no like screw that anchors this down or anything. So the reason for that hole is so that you can get the pin into place. Because of the size of this housing, there's no way, once you've got this in place here, there's no way to get a pin in there without having an access hole to drop the pin in from above. And then the grub screw isn't to hold the pin in place, it's to keep your diff fluid from leaking back out again, because the pin is going to be held in place by the gear. So you're not going to want to tighten that M3 by 4 grub screw down very far. If you tighten it down too far, that grub screw could potentially impact on the gear and lock things up. Okay, I've been working away on this. I cut the foam pieces. They're mentioned here in step 2.1. They're called volume compensators. It looks like a piece of closed cell foam. I don't think it's going to absorb the oil. It says when the differential gets hotter, the foam inserts will absorb the pressure of the expansion of the oil. In other words, they're going to compress. So they provide a shrinkable mass. So as the oil expands, it can squeeze the foam and create volume for the oil to move into. Now, they don't mention it specifically, but I'm gonna, oops, dropped one of those. Both of these out drives, they're not on a bearing. They kind of run as a bushing. Just rotate inside here, metal on metal. I gotta not tip that upside down. I'm gonna put a very small amount of grease on this surface right here, where it rotates against there and against here. That will just prevent wear. Like I said, they don't specifically mention applying oil or grease, but I'm gonna do it and see if any issues arise. Again, I'm talking a very small amount. I'm using some low-C high pressure black grease. And again, I'm just putting enough to make a little film. I just used a little dab and then wiped it around in there. Now, getting these little O-rings in place is going to be a little difficult. Use something dull. Well, that's my front door again. Sorry about that. I'm just using an Allen wrench to go ahead and press that into place. Just working it around, going around the edge until that O-ring is seated. And now I put in the washer. Both of those were stuck together. And again, just tap that down in place. And now it's time to slide in the pin. And as you can see here, hopefully, depending on the lighting, see if I can. Basically, you're gonna slide this pin in, and you kind of just need to press against it a little bit and rotate the out drive with your finger until you feel it starting to slide into place. And then you can push it through. I need a narrower Allen wrench there. There we go. So, as you can see, hopefully, let's see if I can't zoom in a bit better on that. There, you can see the pins in place there. And now I can just drop the gear on top, and it is seated properly on top. So that portion of the assembly is done. Okay, the next is to set up the large gear, and that's going to be a very similar process. Oh, right, I need to put in that that M3 grub screw. Might as well start that now. And again, you don't want to thread that in all the way. Just keep an eye on it and make sure that you're not getting it through to the gear. Now this is going to feel a little stiff because of that O-ring, but that is normal. Oh, I left the okay, I left the bearing off the out drive. So just got to disassemble this. And this is good practice because I'm going to be doing this from time to time if I change out oil. So you're going to line up the pin with the hole there. And just going to use a pair of needle nose to gently grab the pin and slide it down. I don't need to pull it all the way out. Just need to seat the make sure that the little O-ring is seated properly. And then I can put the large flat washer back in. Go. Line that up again and put the grub screw back in. I actually don't mind that I had to do that because it's a good learning process. A lot easier to learn it now than to have to figure it out at a race. Okay. Next step, get the second out drive, get the gear. That bearing just snaps onto the gear. Again, I'm going to put a tiny bit of grease. Just want to show you how much I'm putting on there. It's just a little bit. Then half of that will probably end up on my finger after I wipe that around the edge here. It's good to have a rag handy. Definitely use something that's lint free. You can get microfiber rags that are lint free at most car places, like an auto parts store of one name brand or another. Sometimes the best way to get these pins in place is to just grab them with a needle nose plier and get them started. And then the big gear drops it on top. You got to make sure that pin is centered. Here we go. Okay, I'm going to break for a minute, see if there's any packages. Okay, on to step number 3. And I'm using my shock stand. It actually is perfect for handling these out drives, especially at this point in the process. So what I'm doing is I've got one gear on either side, they face inward, and I've got a washer on either one, and I'm going to just back them off a little bit and then lower it in to make sure that I get the washers in place correctly. And then I can just use a tool to ease the gears apart and let them drop into their natural place, and use the tool to rotate the pin so that the flat side is facing up. Slightly wider Allen wrench is a great way to do that. Just hold it like so. That way these pins are going to come together. Okay, basically the same as before, with the exception of I'm going to hold this in the middle with a pair of needle nose pliers. That way I can lower it into place. Well, that may not work. I was hoping that would be one way to do it. It may just be these pliers are a little raggedy at the ends, but I just don't want to lose one of the washers as I'm have it slide off the edge as I'm putting this in place. There we go. And actually dropped in nice and easy. And you can see that is working properly. Gears are rotating just as they should. So now it is time to fill this with diff oil. And since they've capped these off with some aluminum, I'm just gonna make a small hole. We'll see if it's viscous enough to pour through there. And that may not work. And this is some really thick stuff, somewhere between honey and snot. Now, if it was a very thin oil, not as viscous as this stuff is, and this is like a thick honey, the 1 millimeter above measurement, as depicted here in step 4, might work, but with this stuff as thick as it is, I recommend using the weight method, and that's what I did, and I've got it at 40.16. Now they recommended 40.15. That 0.01 gram is such a small amount. I'm not even sure if I can get that out without taking too much. There we go. So just using the tip of a knife. First I filled it in a little bit at a time. I got to 40.9, and then I slowly added a little blob at a time until I hit the correct weight. So that's how I recommend doing it. Once you have these open, I definitely recommend trying to keep them upright if possible, unless you're going to cut that aluminum all the way off, which I'm going to do, because otherwise that's just going to get to be a problem. The oil will get through and onto there and never get rid of it. It'll always be a mess when I open it. So I'm just gonna go ahead and trim that off. I'm guessing that this is going to be the rear diff with the thicker viscous oil. That way it'll be tighter and closer to a limited slip effect. Okay, so down to the last step, closing this up. Weighed in right, and you definitely want a rag for this. Let me check that weight again. I had it zeroed out, but nope. Gonna do it right. I've got 40.23 now. I thought I had zeroed the scale, but I must not have done it completely. Oh, wrong one. Just scoop a little bit of this out with the tip of a knife and then kind of roll it like spaghetti. Okay, 40.14. That's close enough to being on the money. And like I said, you definitely want a rag because you're going to want to clean that stuff off of everything. It's I have the feeling that once that stuff gets loose, it's a nightmare. Okay, so I'm going to place the gasket in place first, so I've got it over the 4 holes for the bolts. It might be easier to, okay, I'm going to clean that gasket off. There's some flashing here. I don't want that getting into the gears. Seat the gasket properly. Use an Allen wrench or some other dull tool that's not going to tear it, and make sure it's centered on the 4 holes and seated. I'm just going to put one bolt through part way to keep things in alignment and get things started. We'll see if the gear pops off here. Yep, it sure did. Okay. That's going to be a pain in the neck. See, the pin wants to slide out. Okay. use a wrench to center up that gasket. Okay, I'm going to pause up the video while I tighten all 4 screws. Okay, one diff assembled, and as you can see, we've got a proper differential action there, but this is very stiff. It may loosen up as it warms up and gets used a little bit, but this has definitely got to be the rear. I mean, it is a 1/6, but this is the stiffest diff action I've ever felt. As you're tightening these down, make sure that you've got this all the way in tight, and give one of the out drives a turn to make sure, not a full turn, just a little bit, just to make sure that the gears are meshed properly, so that this can close all the way up, and then continue tightening. So there we go, one built diff. I'm going to go ahead and do the other one. It is identical to this with the exception of how thick the diff fluid is. If I come across anything interesting during that process that I didn't cover here, I'll definitely cover it, and when they're both together, I'll kind of show you, get an idea of what the difference in the action is. Okay. Okay, 2 diffs built. I was incorrect. That first one had the thinner, the less viscous of the diff lubes. This is 1000K, so 1000, 1000, or 1 million, whereas this is 80,000. So not a huge difference, but it's definitely there. You can feel it. I'm really surprised the front diff is this stiff. I'm assuming these are going to loosen up once they're run in a bit, and the diff lube has heated up and cooled down at least once or so, and really spread around throughout the diff. This 1 million is really tight. Just to make sure that I put the correct one in the correct place, I just put a little strip of this masking tape on each one, and wrote the number of the lube, so when I get to that point I can just peel it off. It seemed easier than keeping these bags around. Sometimes I keep old, or not old, just used Ziplocs like these, because they can be really handy when you're trying to organize parts for something else. So I have a box that I throw different sizes in. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please click like, and please subscribe to my channel.